Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, building a legacy series with Legacy Communications.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, we are back with the second episode in our Building a Legacy series, and we're going to be here today to help brands and agencies build for the future, and it's in partnership with Legacy Communications, an award-winning agency not only in Ireland but globally. And it is an agency that's founded on the principles of soundness, curiosity and braveness. So we talked about that in the whole first season we did with Kev and Bernard, the founding of the Legacy Communications. But today is all about the evolution of PR, and it kind of flows on brilliantly if you listen to last week's episode on AI and digital PR and kind of the evolution of search. We're getting into kind of how PR has truly evolved and how the PR that we thought about 15 or 20 years ago, while some of the foundational things are the same, a lot has changed and we need to figure out how we evolve. So to do that today, I am joined by amazing guests. First, beside me I have Pippa Doyle, who's Senior Manager of Global PR at Whoop. I always wonder if to say Whoop right. Is it Whoop?
You got it.
Whoop.
Nailed it.
Whoop.
Yeah. It should be fun.
She leads all PR efforts for the Human Performance Company, building awareness and understanding of Whoop via complex global brand communication strategies. We're going to hear all about that. Then we have Shireen McDonagh, and she leads brand and content at Legacy. She's worked across the full marketing mix, both agency and client side. I always loved that perspective when we got agency and client side, and drives multi-channel campaigns for her clients, but also sits on the boards of the Marketing Society, the wonderful Athletics Ireland and Lindenhall Theatre. And we then have Niamh Hopkins, who's Head of Consumer PR at Legacy. He's worked in journalism, worked at agency side, and leads the PR division at Legacy Communications, and was shortlisted for the PRII Impact Awards.
Last week, yeah.
There you go. And her work spans FMCG, retail, health and hospitality. So great span of work that we're going to get to talk about today. So listen, thanks so much for joining me. We kind of touched on there at the opening. PR has changed, but a lot of people hold on to, and I think the name of the series is great, Building a Legacy, but it's about the future legacy of PR. Some people hold on to some of the legacy perceptions of PR as being the press release. Niamh, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
How do you have conversations that help people shift that perception of PR?
It's actually, it happens a lot where a senior stakeholder maybe particularly wants to know are they going to land the front page of the Irish Times or the Independent, and there is nothing quite like that buzz of getting that print piece, but I think it comes back to who's the audience, what are the objectives, who are we trying to target here, and that really comes down to that briefing stage and focusing in on that, and then keeping everyone kind of aligned on the journey as you go and taking them back to who the audience is and where we should be targeting them. And it's not necessarily the Irish Times, great and all as it is, and it's an education piece, I think, as you go, and it's not as obvious to everyone in the organisation maybe as it should be. So yeah, it is common. We
touched on it actually in last week's episode in terms of that perception. I remember it was very much around the photo call and the byline, and that was the thing, and it wasn't the front page, it was at least right hand side. And okay, we know that was obviously print of its time, and it worked and did a thing. But that's kind of, Shireen, from your perspective, kind of the day-to-day, you've obviously seen a shift as well, and you've been both client side and agency side. What for you is kind of the things that you're talking to people about to help them see how it's changed and evolved?
Well, it's funny, I think you alluded to it there. I feel using the word PR, as great as PR is, I feel like we need to evolve to just refer to it as communications, because I suppose people are so focused on PR being the Irish Times front page or media relations, and it's so much more than that. So for me personally, I'm very much like channel agnostic. Multi-channel is my domain, that's where I live. And I really feel modern contemporary communications is heading in a space where it can lead creative. It's a particular way of approaching creative and creativity in terms of being agile, newsworthy, faster and relevant. So I think where we're at in terms of communications and looking to the future of that, I think it's just such an interesting time. Yeah.
And I think that's why we are Legacy Communications, and you see it with a lot of agencies now. They've evolved from being X or Y PR. It is that kind of full range, as you say.
But I'll come to you in a second, but I've talked about it before, Shireen, because I worked with you before, and that idea of actually being a communications agency came through. And again, the example I've always loved is you came to us with an idea to sponsor a particular radio show. And I remember the email came through and myself and Alma had a conversation about it, and I was like, nah, I don't think so. And I said, listen, thanks, great idea, but I don't think it's right for us. And you came back with, I hear what you're saying, but here's 3 reasons why I think this would be the right thing for you to do. I distinctly remember the email coming through, and it was so well thought out and considered and pushed back that it was like you were thinking about the entirety of our communications approach. You were looking at, this is what is good for the brand. So I think that's just a shift. I always think it's a wonderful example of thinking about PR and communications more broadly.
Yeah, they feed each other, don't they?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a big education piece. And obviously, I'm coming from client side, so like, you guys can disagree with me or agree with me, but would love to hear it because I want to be the best client I can be. But essentially, going exactly that. What was that sponsorship going to actually deliver then from a PR perspective too? Because they do all feed each other. And as we're again in a world where it's getting more and more commercial, it's kind of difficult to differentiate the two at this point. So it has to be communications as a whole. Like, PR on its own actually won't succeed anymore. I think in the next 2 years, like, I think it'll be quick. Yeah. That's not going to fly anymore. Like, and to your point of even being able to provide that advice, you're a strategic advisor in your role as an agency too, like, which is really important for a client.
And how have you, kind of maybe on the client side, have you had to change how you're set up or structured to be able to adapt to this new world of PR, I guess?
Yeah, and like, I manage global regions, so there's like differences for each region, but all the same when it comes to something like an event or spokespeople. And like, whether I'm looking after them or not, those creators or stakeholders internally are spokespeople for our brand. So to make sure that we ensure it's the right message that's being delivered, whatever the medium, is really important. How we would operate together is, we're all as well like very different specialties, but like from brand media, ensuring that there's alignment with PR activity, and it's easy to do when it's a larger campaign. It definitely becomes more difficult in our day to day, especially because something like Whoop it's complex because it means something different to everyone, whether you're caring about your sleep or your recovery or you're in the gym or whatever. So it can be challenging, but there is no other option but to look at it as a communications strategy or organisation.
Yeah.
I think for me, PR at its heart fundamentally is about driving fame, driving awareness. It's word of mouth. So all of these newish channels that we have now to be able to use to create richer kind of opportunities for that is brilliant. It all comes from, well, of course I would say that I'm the head of PR, but it stems from what PR is, and sometimes I'll get a brief that looks almost quite limiting, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to bring Shireen in on this. This audience definitely needs video content or social content, whether that's produced with Legacy or whether they have it internally with the client. It doesn't matter, but it's really important that we're kind of, just because the PR person sends the PR person the brief, you have to kind of crack it open, I think, and really look at the audience and what channels they're consuming. Back to that point earlier, it's maybe not the Irish Times, maybe it needs to be a purely social campaign, but that's still PR to me because you're driving that word of mouth.
You mentioned a very good word there, fame. I think that's such an important, more people know things that are famous. And I think in marketing, I've touched on it before, where if we say fame, people are like, oh, that sounds like a dirty word, you know? Because it sounds like an ego thing or something like that, or the marketer wants to be famous, but it's more about... It's
cut through in a busy, cluttered space. That's what you're here to do. Creative ideas, strategic ideas, whatever the content is, whatever the outputs are that are going to impact and influence. And that's really what you need to bring it back to, whatever the outputs or the publications or whatever it is, I
think saying brand fame is such a lovely message to put in a brief. Like, it would just excite anyone working on whatever that campaign is or moment.
Or even in the most basic level, it's about reputation, and is it reputation enhancing? So even if you don't get to the fame level of success, has it done a really positive reputation enhancing job?
Or protecting reputation sometimes as well. It's all of that. So
well, that's because strong brands, again, all the evidence is out there that strong brands can see themselves through reputational damage. And one of the best, obviously, was Volkswagen all those years ago. Were in so much trouble, but it was such a strong brand. They obviously did lots of things to improve, but it came through, and it's probably back to where it was before the controversies that they went through. So there's so much to it.
Sometimes it's what you don't see as well, what's being kept out of the media or away from the content, which is just as important.
It's also an inevitability, I think, as brands are growing. As you get bigger, that's going to happen. People aren't going to like you. And that is kind of has to be in the back of our minds all the time.
I think the future of content is where people are developing content and outputs that are just kind of irrelevant, and they're like completely vanilla. They don't go through, I think there's kind of a real risk area in there for brands into the future.
Well, 100%. There's probably a lot of that currently. But so when we kind of start thinking then about how to develop something, again, we touched on it a little bit last week, but I think it's important to get into this episode, is or might have previously been seen as the add-on or the after or the optional extra, but actually when it's central and the starting point, you can drive something that's more powerful. Niamh, what's your take? Head of PR. I disagree fundamentally.
Like it really starts with a good brief, and it sounds again quite obvious, but for us, we work with our clients closely to develop that brief. Either they're giving us a written brief or we're helping kind of interpret what we've heard and giving that back to them. And it's really important because often stakeholders in a business, and I'm sure people will know this as well, they mightn't be aligned, and someone's coming from a PR point of view, someone's coming from social, and the left isn't talking to the right.
Yeah.
So it's about getting clarity and, as I said, kind of looking internally then who needs to come in on this brief, what are the specialists that we need to bring in. But yeah, I think PR is at the heart. It should be at the heart of all good briefs and helping kind of spread the message, spread the story, whatever it is then, and the channels kind of come out of that. Yeah.
How can you receive a brief, but I personally wouldn't write a brief without, this is the objective. So I have 4 or 5 buzzwords that I use. One is like freedom through structure. So I'm like, the brief is your structure, but I want you to deliver what you think is best as an expert. That's why we hire an agency. Like it shouldn't be restrictive. It should be very clear. And again, that's why I'm like over-inform. I'll give you all the information to your point exactly, so you know how that works. And if an agency comes back and has questions, I'm like, give them to me. I want all the questions. I want to help you clarify. And that's like the goal that I put on myself, because that's me doing the best I can for my business that I work for, not my business.
I think check-ins along the way is something that we're seeing with a lot of clients now. It's not this kind of come back to us in 3 weeks if you're lucky to get that, but let's build in some tissue sessions, to use that word. But like, are we going in the right direction? I think that's really helpful, rather than waiting for the kind of final D-Day and then it's, oh God, no, maybe it's not right. So I think that's really helpful when we work with clients on that as well.
And also I think for maybe clients who are maybe less mature in their marketing and content efforts, why not involve other stakeholders in the briefing? So like, we've had some briefings where you go in and different stakeholders in the business present, and then the marketeer or the comms lead presents their version of the brief. So having heard that, this is what I think we want to do, but please advise what you've heard from the room today. And that can work really well as well. Like, we're ultimately here to help. We're all marketeers, so why not get the best minds on trying to figure out what the objective is.
I think budget guidelines, if you can, like often people are reluctant to include them because they don't want us to limit our thinking, which we totally get. And sometimes it'll be like, this is the budget, but you know, it's okay, add in extra ideas if you have them, but often people don't want to disclose any budget. And you need to know what range are you in, because it's often where so much time is invested, particularly at a senior level and creative level. We might be bringing Claire in or other leads, so it's really important to get that. And so often it's not included.
Adam Morgan talked about it in his book called A Beautiful Constraint, and he said budget can be a beautiful constraint. Like, it can actually be a thing that unlocks even more creativity, because you have to figure stuff out within that constraint.
It's also like a trust thing, I think, with your team. Like, you're like, you know what, like, I only have $5,000. What can you do in this? Am I totally off the wall? To your point, like, some people who are less mature of a brand, like, you've no idea probably what the cost is or what that's going to mean. As I said, like, the landscape is continuously changing, so the trust really in your team is so important to share that information, and then for you guys to feel safe sharing it back. I mean, like, that's great, but this is what we can deliver with that.
One of the things we were kind of talking about before was, I think, like, you look at something like events, right? An event as a potential content type machine and PRable machine, and events there can be event bashing, and there's a lot of events. You can go to a lot of events. I had a brilliant manager once, and she was like, we're going to go to the biggest, and we're going to be the biggest at the biggest. So instead of doing lots of small events, she was like, let's pull back and let's just be, as we were trying to build the brand. And it was 100% the right thing to do at that time. But it's having a point of view, I think, on where events sit, how you measure them. But there's a huge amount you can do in that space from the content perspective. Like, literally from the lead up, we did wonderful direct mail pieces inviting clients to an event, and that goes out like 12 weeks beforehand. You know what I mean? So it's an amazing journey. Tell me how you use events as a bit of a machine.
I would always say they're more, for me to get what I need out of an event, we would go very exclusive, because it's a premium brand and it should be a premium experience. So we tend to not go for these huge, we would, differentiate. For my world, I go exclusive. For our members, we do often we have a lot of ambassadors, so we would run, like, say, run clubs with some ambassadors in local areas, or get into the community in that way, and we would use our email marketing machine for that. But for me, I'd be looking more at like press, influencers, creators. I'll tend to latch onto a moment, whether that's like a cultural moment or something in our calendar, and bring people there so we can really use it as a time to speak about the brand and meet our people. Because I think we don't have a bricks and mortar store. Like it's a very elusive kind of brand. We're a big hype machine, amazing at that stuff, but delivering them what people need to know, because again, from a Whoop perspective, it can be a bit standoffish if you're not an elite athlete and that's what you think of.
Yes.
Being able to bring people down to your level, being like, I'm not an elite athlete, I don't use it for this. Please hear this spokesperson who's going to speak about recovery or sleep or something like that. So those moments, we really use it as like premium, gorgeous way to bring our brand to life in our key regions. So that's how I would do it, and it's a complement onto a larger campaign. But again, bringing in the likes of our influencers or ambassadors means you get that content, and social becomes then a huge part of that moment as well, particularly when it's more of a cultural moment, like January Jumpstart, for instance, people getting back into it, or like September back to school, that kind of moment too. It's so relatable that you put your brand in a position there, you're like, oh, okay, that moment looked amazing, but also the content off the back of it looks fab.
And I would challenge brands that are doing events and it's not showing in a 360 way through marketing efforts. Are you doing it right? Because people just overlook the power of email marketing. So you could have a database of 1 million subscribers to your email database, yet 20 people were at the event and nobody else knows about it. So even if you have a product, like what content is being captured that can even feed into email marketing over time. So again, kind of back to us considering like it's comms, it's not just PR.
And I think obviously during COVID, it really faded out, and we kind of tried and had some success with virtual events. It suited some clients and some events, sometimes it didn't. But I find they're back now more than ever because of the opportunities for what you can get out of the investment in an event. So it's something we're doing a lot of at Legacy, The Modry event, we have a series of them, and it was a really good example of where that PR and content intersection kind of comes into play to try and understand it. So the PR team, my team, are working on every aspect of that event, right down from the concept through to who's there, and then Shireen's team kind of coming in and being there on site and capturing all that content as part of their social strategy. So it's a really good example of the two. So that was a little sales pitch there.
But it is a great example to show how you need that kind of interconnection with the agency and
specialisms.
Well, it does, because you have that depth now. We were talking about in the last week's episode. There's obviously the depth with kind of the expertise on the online, digital PR, and in all the other areas. How do you think, though, about maybe from your perspective, you did talk about like the outputs. So how do you think about the measurement? What are the things you're trying to measure in something maybe like an event? It
really depends. It really depends on the moment or the campaign. I know if I use an example, like we worked at Legacy on an event for our kind of like our big bang into Ireland sort of moment. Whoop has been kind of quietly here for a while, but when we got an agency in place, it was kind of like, okay, cool, we've arrived. But that event was much more, it was a complete mix of content creators, our partners, as well as press. And I was just like, we just need to be seen and for people to consider us. So for that, I was like, the goal is get people there, talk to them, give them an enjoyable night, but that's also really educational and informative. And we absolutely delivered that. And that, I mean, it's a lovely brief, but when it comes to something a little bit more niche, is the wrong word, but say something for our launch, for example, and we launched the Whoop 5.0 in MG. And for that, it was like, okay, well, let's do gifting instead, because it's a huge message. So an event is too much. Or when it came to our events, again, it comes back to that exclusive feel. Can we bring one feature to life and make them understand that feature? That's the goal. But it really depends.
You've touched on influencers, content creators. I don't know if we've landed on a name for them, but it's a huge part now of the world that you're operating in. Maybe Niamh, from your perspective, how are you seeing them fit in? Or do you have a preference, influencers, creators?
No, it depends. It depends on the client, really. But I think like it's still a relatively new part of communication. So there's still lots of learnings there from our side, from the client side, from the agent side. I think one thing we're trying to educate on, when you can give an influencer or creator an interpretive brief rather than a really specific want to control every word, you'll just get so much more out of it. The reason you've picked them to partner with is for their whatever that magic is that has their engagement. And sometimes I think we see clients or brands who are maybe just nervous to let loose a little bit, but if you don't, it's like trying to control every word. A journalist, right? You can't, and you have to be willing to take risks, moderate risks, and learn from it.
The brand piece, like the controlling the message piece, is hard for brands. What do you talk to brands about, Shireen, in that sense? Because I agree, you have to kind of, if you love something, let it be free.
Yeah.
But what are the guardrails you can put around it?
Yeah, because we don't want it to be brand damaging.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it goes back to what's the creative idea? Are influencers even the right channel in the first place? Or are you just tagging them on because every other brand is? So it's being brave and asking yourself that question. And then if you're going to work with them, I think it's about a brief should clearly communicate the creative idea. So that for me is the number one thing you are trying to get across to a creator, and then set the boundaries in which you want the person to work. So really getting across the no-goes, and then, as Niamh said, then leaving a lot of space for their voice to be layered in. And then I think it's over to collaboration. Like us as an agency, we work really well with influencers. It's about, again, trying to take that talent on a bit of a journey and give them lots of freedom to create, come back, ask questions, maybe even come back with creative treatments. That's something maybe not a lot of brands or other agencies do enough. I think it's like to actually kind of work through that together without it being like death by feedback. Because if it is death by feedback, then it's also being brave enough to say, actually, maybe we shouldn't do this, and let's maybe pay for your time, or establish with the influencer that you're going to pay for the concept and then to execute. Could be a way of approaching it.
I think what's great about Whoop, and Pippa can expand on this, is they'll always approach influencers who are already wearing a device because it's authentic. So it's a really good strategy you guys have, actually.
Yeah, I'm so lucky for that, because it is key, and it means, and I do feel for brands who don't have that level of engagement that we've had, we're so lucky to have that, but it is hard to know exactly who to work with or who to choose for your brand. If it's a clothing brand or insurance or something, you're like, it applies to everyone. So finding the right person can be hard. But another point on it is how I feel in Ireland, and I was only speaking about this with the legacy team, is if I was once looking for a journalist, that journalist is probably now an influencer and has their own channel, and the crossover it's twofold now, always. And if they're not already, they will be soon, more than likely. Aside from maybe some elements, like some verticals, I don't feel like maybe sport is slightly different, but particularly in the lifestyle press, like a lot of them would have, where they have a radio show or a podcast, and then you're all mediums.
You are tuned into That's What I Call Marketing, building a legacy series with Legacy Communications.
With the kind of influencer creator, one of the other questions that I think brands try to figure out is, does the number matter? Does it matter if they have 7,000 followers or 700,000? Do you care about that, or do you have different levels?
Different levels. We have very different levels. But we do care. Yeah, we care about it. Particularly in that section, like for creators and for influencers. As I said, we would work with people authentically, and then if it moves into a paid relationship, they have to have been wearing it first, really, because it's just such a considered purchase to wear it 24/7. But we do care about that. If that's where they're going to live primarily, and I think if it works in our world, again, it's all our world's communications, but if it works in my world from a press perspective, that's a bonus, as opposed to being the reason why we work with them.
I think it's about the engagement. If somebody has really high numbers and then the engagement isn't there when you partner with them, that's more of a concern to me. You'd rather have someone kind of a little bit less, but the engagement is higher and richer, and you can see that kind of commentary coming through. So again, it depends on the brief. You have a lot of brands who want to get in at grassroots level and work at micro influencers. Obviously there's budget kind of benefits there, but going on the journey with people is great as well. And authenticity in a small market, we will have clients understandably who want competitor exclusion, but sometimes you're trying to explain, okay, you're doing one piece of content with them, it's not a retained partnership. But at the same time, like we work with Aldi, for example, and if someone is signing with us and then doing something with Lidl a few weeks later, Aldi's probably not ringing them again. Just use your head as well in a small market. If you're trying to build something and get in there longer term with a brand, be smart in a small market like that.
And I guess there's different types, like you can look at, is it for reach?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So some will just be a pure reach play to get
to
high awareness, and then other things you'll need more, as you say, for Whoop, often helping people understand the features of the product, and so that requires a different type of
it's level deeper,
isn't it? And different kind of content creator, I guess.
And the format now needs to be considered. Is it for a TikTok audience, or is it just going to live on Instagram? Isn't it, Shireen? So to be adapted then because of that.
Yeah, and I think there's the authenticity piece as well in terms of the output to be considered in terms of that macro or a micro influencer. Also, sometimes the volume of outputs you'll get from a micro or mid-tier influencer will be a lot bigger
because they're hot as well.
Yeah, completely. And they have space to think through the product that they're trying to promote. Maybe sometimes the macro influencers, there's another partnership kind of hot on the tails, and so it's going to get that done. And so I completely agree with Whoop's approach in terms of allow the macro people to be those who actually were brand fans and own the product.
And it's very different as well. Like some people, I know my attention span is as good as a fish at this point, so I'm here for any TikTok content, and that will drive.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
For me. Sorry, what was that? So that would drive through for me. But again, like some people are, particularly in our world, are looking for a really in-depth review. So you're finding people on very different needs for the brand.
And that's really interesting. We were talking about that last week. I was at a talk in the UK where they were talking about attention strategies and that thing of it's so little now and people are just scrolling through. But then on the other hand, people will listen to a 14-episode podcast about one topic. So there's never been as much content out there to choose from, and all formats have a place.
It is really interesting, even your own behaviours when you're scrolling through, and we all scroll, the things that do stop you. And sometimes it is something that's a minute and 40 seconds. I don't sometimes know. This is fascinating.
We talk a lot about what are the things that you're sharing in the family WhatsApp or the best friends WhatsApp. That's where you want to be, I think, in a lot of cases. When brands say to us, we want to be shareable, I think that's the consideration.
I don't know if I think it feels like a good example, but the reactive thing is really interesting. And I know recently with Aldi, you reacted to the Oasis concert.
It was led by their social team internally, and we would have supported on PR. But a really good example, look, a lot of brands wanted to get in on that Oasis piece, and sometimes it wasn't, I suppose originally it mightn't have been relevant to all audiences. I think by the end it was somewhat of a cultural phenomenon that transcended everything. But yeah, they did it really well. And that's an example of, it's a planned reactive piece, and then you're kind of setting that up. And again, you need to be set up on the brand side for that, and they are. And another good example is Krispy Kreme, who we work with, and they have a dedicated social media manager across UKI, so we're able to go to them with ideas that they can get up on social quickly. They're doing it from the brand side. It's not with legacy, but it works, it comes together. And we'd like a great example actually last year when Leo Varadkar resigned. Was it last year or the year before? God. And we reacted quickly. I think there was a bit of an outcry about that, and we had a PR idea like, let's do free donuts. Really simple for anyone called Leo or Leona, and it all lined up, and we got loads of coverage out of that. It was just one of those really nice examples, but everyone reacted within 24 hours to do it, or the moment is gone. And you have to be set up that way.
I think the whole brand newsroom just comes back to the crux of this conversation, is it's communications. That means something different to every brand for whatever stage you're at, and you can continue to grow that with the rate of and the pace of how things are changing to the level that your brand is at and is willing to and is capable of. To your point, like Sky News aren't going to go onto TikTok, but there might be a brand where that's the top medium for them right now.
But I think really the idea of the brand newsroom, some might say, is that terrifying for PR? I don't think so. I think it's about having so much more opportunity to carry the PR message, to carry the fame, to carry the awareness across. And if you think back to years ago, I know like my dad is a retired journalist and he was Irish Independent, and you'd be out when I was a child and someone would come up in the town and ask him to help. Genuinely, like they'd a complaint or they needed to get a story. There was no other way. This is pre-Twitter times. And then obviously suddenly everyone became a microjournalist and you're into the truth crisis of information and all of that. But the fact that the brand can now be the newsroom and can have the publishing and should be aligned. And again, sometimes we'll see a brand or a client put up something really interesting on social and I'm there going, oh, why didn't you tell us about that? That would have been a great press release as well. And they're saying, we didn't know, we weren't told until it went up. It's all this thing. It's back to the alignment, it's back to, it should all run kind of in sync with each other across all the channels.
And that's how the speed and like the speed, the approvals and then the alignment, like it is a thing to try to get right. The approval probably being a hard one for brands. Do you have any hints or tips for pre-approved? Do you have content that you kind of know this is going to be okay, legal aren't going to be all over us on this one?
No, we just work very well as a team. We just know the steps that need to be taken, especially if it's something quick. Like we have the right people in the room to make those conversations or make those decisions. And I think it's finding the right hook. Like for us, I'm so lucky in my job, like that Will Ahmed, like our CEO, is definitely a thought leader in the space, so almost him delivering the message makes sense and it's easier then to kind of go, okay, the brand may want to step a little bit further away from that. They won't want to be the ones to deliver, and I think Will is more of a trusted voice in the space. Let's use him. And we'll just make sure we provide like the right information so that he doesn't say something that is out of line. Or briefings as well, like it's kind of, that's my job, is to make sure he has the information that he should be delivering and knows exactly what to do. And again, it's having those eyes at the back of your head and like working with legal and working with our CMO and our team as well to make sure it feels on brand and isn't in conflict with our voice as well. But approvals wise, we're kind of all in the trenches together, which is great at the level of we're at with the brand.
Yeah, I've just heard the briefing notes are amazing. Is he one of those CEOs that can just read thing once and then knows all the right things to hit?
Like
he's people do that,
and he reads it. Like when you write a brief and you're like, I know it'll never be read. Our spokespeople are amazing. We have some absolutely incredible women as well who lead like data science and performance science. And again, it's very complex topics. For them, it's also, I want to make sure their message is delivered. That's too complex for someone reading a lifestyle publication. That's not really the information they want. Making sure that they feel supported, one, to deliver the message, but also again with us that we've set them up for success. And again, really comes back to having those really good relationships with them to ensure that they feel safe, like that we're doing the right thing. But all of them, I'm very lucky, read their briefs. It's great.
Very good at PRing your team.
No, they're amazing. We're in the background.
But I think it kind of goes back to, I love what you've just said there, because you are a unified team. And actually I think sometimes when you look at maybe clients that again maybe aren't as mature, there's a fragmentation from a business perspective. If we go back to the fundamental of, we're in communications marketing, we are trying to build a brand. So if people internally can't understand where some piece of thinking has come from, there's probably an issue in terms of, we won't go back to Mary from finance, but that if part of the business just doesn't understand what you're about as a brand, I think that's where that misalignment comes from. Approvals slow down because people have different viewpoints. So I actually think it's always a really good hygiene test of how well your organisation is, I suppose, on that same page.
So maybe it's a good point to get into kind of then how it could be set up, because people are watching, listening to this going, right, we're getting ready for next year. Maybe it's younger brands that are kind of trying to get this set up. What are the things people can practically do? Because again, the worry is people go, okay, Whoop's big, they've got all the resources, but actually this is possible, I think, for any brand. But what are the things people should be thinking about to try to set themselves up? What are your thoughts?
I think learning early that it's have comms in the room. Like when you're making key business decisions, you've no idea what they may pick up on and feed through. It's as you grow, like people remember things like that. If Mary from finance is doing her job correctly and that's her realm, it's not her job to think about what comms are going to do, but it's comms' job to understand what Mary's doing. And you do need to be there, and I think that's overlooked in businesses, which is understandable. Like that's not their role. Have them in the room from the very beginning, and so that they can have the eyes in the back of their head, as I keep saying, and to be thinking forward and driving on, because it just makes the world of difference in the long run. It would be my very first piece of advice for anyone getting started. Okay.
Shireen, what's your thoughts on kind of how, again, maybe smaller brands can start thinking about entering the brand newsroom space?
So probably two things from my perspective would be, one, think multi-channel. So the minute you put on a channel specific hat, you are limiting your creativity. So if you are going to start thinking about things being one social post, you've probably already kind of missed the bigger idea. So really think multi-channel, think about the idea, think about the creative, and then as a practical tip, sometimes when you think about that big piece of creative, then in 10 minutes, can you come up with 3 quick ideas as to how that could manifest in each channel that you're going to work on. So, if it's a dead duck, you'll know fast. And then the second piece is probably give somebody on the team space. And I know space is, sometimes as an agency you don't have a lot of space, but it is about time. Who on the team, even if it has to change week on week, can have enough space to just pause for a moment and consider, are there trends we need to jump on? How can we approach this together as a team? So should we have some sprint sessions, like basic project management skills, but should there be a few sprints that I can plan in across the week? So they'd probably be 2 things that I'd suggest people consider.
I think, like Whoop is obviously set up well, but sometimes it is the bigger organisations that often are conflicted and stakeholders are not aligned. So I think to add to what the girls are saying, just getting clarity to get the best out of your comms team, or if it's an agency partner like us, you need to be clear internally what your objectives are, and then we can work on KPIs together. And I think that's really important. And also, you talk about the annual plan or the planning for next year. Of course, you need to have a business plan and a strategy, but I think being agile, being flexible, we often plan quarterly now with clients because the world is so volatile, and in fast-paced industries like retail or FMCG, just being open to that, or at least being open to looking back and going, is the plan we said 4 months ago actually still right for you as a brand, or in this current world, or on those specific channels? And just being able to, as Shireen said, take a step back and strategically keep looking at that from every which way, I think is really important.
And I think, was it Sir Haggerty might have mentioned in Cannes, like giants can't dance, or it was something like that was the name of his talk. And I think for smaller brands, it's remembering that actually you couldn't be more agile if you tried. There are so many benefits to being smaller. You can be more reactive. And the other piece I think brands overlook is there's a luxury in the fact that there's so much content fragmentation and such a volume of content. Be brave. Unless it's detrimental to the brand, that's a different piece. But if it fails, that's okay. Nobody's going to remember it tomorrow, so move on. So try things. Delete it, hide it. Delete it, hide it. And sometimes, again, that means that there's absolute merit in just work fast, get the work out, be real time, be reactive, because if it doesn't work and it's a bit vanilla, nobody's going to remember it. But if you've now invested 3 weeks of a full marketing team into something that should have been reactive in 24 hours, then there's that kind of return on investment conversation to be had.
I'd also say it's, again, coming back to my point of having them in the room, like there's a misunderstanding of what can be achieved as well, that I think if you are to adopt the notion of a brand newsroom, that won't work if your stakeholders are like, this is really interesting, this will get press. And you have to go, I disagree for this and this reason, and be the expert in the room. And it doesn't matter if you're a small brand or a huge brand, it's you, that's your responsibility. And again, it's not Mary Finance's job to know that, but it's yours to push back and find the right outcome.
And it's also not being so like inside out, all about us, and we've got this to say about us, and it's this feature, that benefit. People don't really.
No, every brand experiences that too. Like, of course, we're all drinking our own Kool-Aid because you have to. And it's the way to go. I love it when my agency's drinking our Kool-Aid. It means that absolutely we're all in.
Yeah, but sometimes
Shireen's ready here. But it is something. It is like you
do
have
sleep
to.
monitor. No.
You do have to zoom out and go, okay, is that actually interesting to someone else, or how can we place it so that it is? Like, where do you find the right time for that?
And sometimes a client, someone on the team would be saying, oh, they want this and they want that, and then actually when you have the conversation with them, they're grateful that we agree, and they're like, okay, thanks, you're supporting me to take this back to X and Y to say, no, this isn't a news story, or this isn't right for content, this is an internal piece, or this is for the newsletter, whatever it is. So it's just always having those challenger conversations. That you're not paying your agency, or you're not having a comms function to say yes to everything.
I feel in a way like, who's the editor-in-chief with the concept of the brand newsroom? Who is it? It can be ideally somebody client side and agency side. The role of that person is quality control, as well as, I feel like, understanding the heartbeat of the consumer.
Yes.
And just making sure that you do have an idea that is on fire. But I think it's a really important piece, like, who's the editor-in-chief that can go defend the idea and team, rather than this kind of vagueness in terms of actually.
It's a great way of looking at it, actually. So, listen, thank you so much for your time today. Fascinating episode. Thoroughly enjoyed it. That's it for this episode of That's What I Call Marketing, our Building a Legacy series with Legacy Communications. Thanks a million to my guests, Pippa, Shireen and Niamh. And don't forget, if you missed last week's episode, you can go back and check it out, and we'll have it up on YouTube, Spotify and Apple, wherever you get your podcast, whether you want to listen or watch, they'll be everywhere. So for me, your host, Conor Byrne, thanks so much for tuning in. Take care.